Some games fail because they launched broken. Some games fail because they got kind of outcompeted against. And then there's a third category. The games that are basically dead on arrival. Not because gamers are evil, not because reviewers were too mean, not because some YouTuber made a thumbnail that pissed you off. They die because the people making them fundamentally did not understand who they were making them for. And once you see this pattern, it's really hard to unsee it. Obviously, the easiest target for an example would be Concord. And if you don't know the Concord situation, Sony launched it in August of 2024 as a $40 hero shooter. Then they pulled it from sales, refunded players, and shut it offline by September 6th, which is only about 2 weeks later. On Steam, it peaked at 697 concurrent players. Sony later shut down Firewalk Studios entirely. And I mean, that's not a rough launch. That's a public execution. And the crazy part is this didn't come out of nowhere. People smelled the problem early. That's the thing modern studios still don't seem to understand. The trailer is market research. The reveal is market research. The first reaction is market research. If the audience watches your trailer and collectively goes, "What the hell was that? Who is this supposed to be for?" That's not them being toxic, that's your warning shot. This isn't just about one dead shooter, it's about a broader disease inside modern gaming, and honestly, kind of inside modern media more broadly, where companies have become so insulated, so overconfident, so allergic to criticism, they confuse internal approval with external demand. That's where this kind of Dunning-Kruger effect comes in. And if you don't know what that is, it's a cognitive bias where people with limited competence in a specific domain overestimate how competent they actually are. The original insight is not dumb people bad. It's that a lack of skill can also damage your ability to accurately judge your own skill. In other words, the less calibrated you are, the more confident you can become for completely retarded reasons. And I think the same pattern shows up at the organizational level in gaming. You get teams, executives, marketers, and internal culture circles that are so socially protected from blunt feedback that they stop being able to tell the difference between actual demand and curated approval, criticism and abuse, audience mismatch and review bombing, a bad product and a misunderstood product. That is an absolutely catastrophic way to run a creative business of any kind. Now, to be fair, not every flop is ideological. Not every layoff is because of culture war nonsense, and not every bad character design is some grand conspiracy to turn us all gay. There are real structural problems in the industry. The 2026 GDC State of Gaming Industry Survey, based on 2,300 respondents, found that 28% of respondents had been laid off in the past 2 years, and that rises up to 33% if you just take US into isolation. Half said their current or most recent employer had conducted layoffs in the last year. 2/3 of AAA respondents said their companies had layoffs, and 74% of students worried about finding jobs in the game industry at all. On top of that, 36% said that they use generative AI in their work, while 52% said generative AI is having a negative impact on their ability to get work done. Part of this is overexpansion after the COVID boom. Part of it is cost inflation. Part of it is absurd development timelines. Part of it is an AI panic or AI adoption. And companies trying to replace their workers with automation before the tech is kind of like ready for it. But here's where we have to stop pretending that that's the whole story. If your industry is bleeding jobs, burning money, and shipping expensive products that audiences reject on site, then the conversation cannot just be, it's just the market conditions. At some point, you have to ask whether these companies are making products people actually want to buy. And in a lot of cases, the answer is clearly no. Absolutely fucking not. Sony itself basically admitted part of this after the Concord implosion. In a November earnings Q&A, Sony said it should have done earlier testing and internal evaluation, and also pointed to organizational fragmentation across planning, development, and sales. And that's basically corporate speak for we didn't validate this thing early enough, and that we had no idea what was going on because we were so scattered to the wind. That is the heart of the problem. Because once a company loses its ability to validate honestly, it starts building products for an imaginary customer. And imaginary customers don't buy games. They certainly don't keep games alive. Look at the broader pipeline logic that keeps showing up. Sony announced Horizon Hunters Gathering this month as a co-op action spinoff with a closed playtest running February 22nd. Fair Games is still publicly framed by PlayStation as a heist game, where you get to break the rules like a modern-day Robin Hood and rob untouchable billionaires. Marathon was delayed after its alpha feedback cycle, and Bungie is now running an open server slam February 26th through March 2nd. Now, I'm not saying every one of these games is doomed. That would be kind of lazy. I'm saying the warning signs matter, and pretending they don't is how you get another Concord, or a Concord 2, or 3, or 10, or wherever the fuck we're at with that now. Because the pattern is a studio builds something for an imagined modern audience, the reveal lands really weird, players react with skepticism, the skepticism gets morally reframed instead of productively examined, then the launch confirms what the trailer already told you, and afterward everyone acts like it was unforeseeable. Like, no, it was foreseeable. It was painfully foreseeable for everyone who was paying attention. The market is not subtle about this stuff. If a fantasy looks weak, if the characters feel focus tested into oblivion, if the tone feels condescending, if the trailer doesn't sell a fantasy that people really want to inhabit, players, they feel that instinctively, instantly. And the more expensive the game is, the less patience people have for being sold a shitty vibe that no one asked for. And that's not unfair, that's just how commerce works. This is why first impressions matter so much more than I think a lot of studios want to admit. Not because players are shallow, but because entertainment is desire. You are asking people to invest time, money, identity, attention, and social energy into a fictional experience. If that fantasy doesn't hit, and if it doesn't hit fucking hard, they walk. And a lot of studios seem almost offended by that reality. That's where the whole treating customers like the enemy part comes in. Because what should happen when players reject a reveal? You should probably test harder. You should probably listen harder. Maybe reevaluate what you're doing. You ask whether the fantasy is clear, whether the genre fits the framing, whether the price makes sense, whether the art direction sells aspiration or repulsion, whether the audience sees itself in the fantasy. What too many companies do instead is moralize the rejection. They take normal customer response and treat it like some kind of weird ethical failure. And once you do that, you stop learning. That's the really poisonous part about this whole thing. Not just that the decision was bad, it's that the company culture often seems to make it hard to admit that it was bad. That's a Dunning-Kruger shaped failure mode that they're in. Not people are stupid, worse. People are being rewarded for sounding certain inside systems that are terrible at correcting certainty. That's how you end up with enormous confidence attached to mediocre ideas. That's also why I think this spreads way beyond gaming. You've seen versions of this in movies and streaming as well, I'm sure. The Marvels finished with about 200 million worldwide, and The Acolyte was canceled after one season. Different medium, same smell. Expensive product, weak pull, then disbelief when the audience doesn't show up the way the boardroom expects. Now we got to kill this kind of lazy excuse making. We already know the market will reward focused games made for real people. Elden Ring has passed 30 million units sold. Helldivers 2 sold 12 million copies in 2 weeks, and Sony said it far exceeded their expectations. Marvel Rivals hit 20 million within weeks of launch. Space Marine 2 was such a hit that Pull-Up CEO openly said their philosophy moving forward is, we do not design and produce games for everyone. We design and produce games for someone. That same interview says the game passed 7 million players, and the entire strategy was based on targeted audiences and uncompromising gameplay. That's not a minor point either. That is the point. A game for everyone is often a game for no one. A game for someone can be a game for millions. That's what competent studios understand. They don't start by asking, how do we make sure no one is ever offended on the internet ever again? They start asking, what fantasy are we selling? Who is it for? And is it actually fun? That's why Helldivers 2 worked. That's why Elden Ring, Space Marine 2 worked. Not because they were for everyone, because they knew exactly what they were, and they didn't hate the people most likely to fall in love with the game. And this is the humiliation for the big studios. The audience is not asking for miracles. They're not asking that every game be a 10 out of 10 masterpiece. They're not demanding personal ideological alignment from every writer and artist who is going to ever work on the game. They're asking for something way simpler. Respect the fantasy, respect the customer, respect the customer's time. Stop lecturing people while asking for their money. Stop mistaking your internal applause for some kind of market demand. Stop treating criticism like a human rights violation. Here's the brutal truth. If your target audience has to be explained to the market like a charity project, you do not have a target audience. If your trailer creates more confusion than desire, the launch is just going to be the autopsy. And if your company culture makes it dangerous to say, is this working? Is this what people want? Then reality will eventually say it for them in quarterly earnings statements. That's what I think we're watching. Not just bad games, not just greedy corporations, not just trend chasing. We're watching an industry that in a lot of cases has become so socially insulated to tell when it's building something people don't fucking want. And that's why this matters so much, because the most dangerous kind of incompetence is not the incompetence that knows it's lost. It's the incompetence that feels morally, aesthetically, and intellectually superior while it drives straight into a fucking wall. And then it acts like a confused retard when the wall wins. So no, I don't think any of this is random. I don't think the audience is a bunch of villains. And I definitely don't think customers are obligated to subsidize bad decisions just because the people making them worked really hard at them. Lots of people work hard on bad shit, and that doesn't make them good or moral. And it sure as hell doesn't mean customers owe them a fucking thing. If modern gaming, and honestly, really modern media more broadly, wants to get out of this death spiral, the answer is not more contempt and more excuse making and more corporate therapy session language about how there's too many challenges in today's atmosphere. The answer is fucking simple. Make things for people who actually exist. Test them early. Test them often. Listen when the audience reacts. Stop treating your buyers like enemies. And for the love of God, stop confusing social protection from criticism with actual competence. Because the market is not a hate mob. It's a lie detector. And you've been failing a lot of fucking tests.